You're awake before the sun dares show its face. The barracks smell like copper and sweat, thick with the ghosts of yesterday's bruises. Men groan through broken noses. A tooth lies forgotten in the dirt. You step over it. You don't flinch. You are not a gladiator. You're worse. You're the man who makes gladiators. They call you lanista. To Rome, you're filth with coin. A flesh dealer. A merchant of muscle and misery. Your name can't be spoken in polite company, but your fighters are cheered like gods. Your breath steams in the cold morning as you walk the sand-lined yard. Chains rattle. You nod to the drill master, a grizzled Thracian, who once killed 3 men before breakfast. He eyes you with the casual hate of someone who remembers freedom. You nod anyway. Each man in this school is an investment, a gamble, a story waiting to be sold to the crowd. You choose who lives today and who bleeds. You choose who might earn freedom or lose a hand trying. A slave named Cassius limps toward the sparring pit. You can smell the rot from his wound before you see it. He begs to fight. He shouldn't even be standing. You promised him the next bout. His wife is still alive. Barely. He needs coin for medicine. The healer warned you. Let him fight, and he might die on the sand. But if he doesn't fight, the crowd will get another no-name Gaul with sloppy footwork. And no one bets on a no-name. Cassius looks up at you, waiting, hoping, bleeding. Already, you hear the gate creak behind you. It's not the healer, not the drill master, not a guard. It's a senator, alone, unannounced. His silk hem sweeps the blood like it belongs there. He lifts one pale hand and points not to Cassius, but to the boy behind him. "I want that one," he says. You glance at the boy. He's 14. Small, fast, untested, also not for sale. But you nod. Of course you do, because when a senator wants a fighter, you give him one, even if that boy is your son. To the crowd, he was king of the sand. To Rome, he was filth in a clean tunic. A lanista dealer in death, trainer of men who never stopped bleeding. He could name every senator's favourite fighting style, every noble's cowardice, and every city's betting odds. He knew how many bones a Mamillo could break with one good swing. He knew how much a man was worth before and after his skull hit the sand. And yet, in the eyes of Roman law, he ranked somewhere between a tavern bouncer and a brothel madam. Infames, that's what they called him. The shameless class. Not because he fought, because he profited from the spectacle. He wasn't allowed to run for office, couldn't testify in court, couldn't dine in polite society. The same men who paid him to host private blood duels would later cross the street to avoid him in daylight. Still, they came to him. Always. Because he had what they wanted. Men who could die beautifully. He was part merchant, part showman. A businessman who bartered in broken teeth. He purchased slaves from war spoils, debtors, criminals, and desperate parents. Some were born to fight. Others had no choice. He trained them, fed them, and sold their violence to the highest bidder. But make no mistake, he didn't see himself as low. He saw Rome's hypocrisy for what it was. A rotting empire wrapped in silk. "You spit on my sandals by day," he once muttered to a senator's scribe, "and beg for front row sand by night." His name wasn't carved into marble, but it echoed in the mouths of thousands, chanted, cursed, feared, in graffiti, across tavern walls, in rumours, traded like dice before a match. Every triumph in the arena put a coin in his hand. Every corpse was a tax write-off, and though the patricians scorned him, the mob loved him, and the mob, in Rome, could make or unmake emperors. So he smiled when they called him scum, because scum, when stepped on, spreads, and beneath the marble of every Roman street, he knew exactly what was buried: blood, sand, bone, and the names of men like him who made the games go on. His kingdom wasn't made of columns and marble. It was built on cages and sand. The ludus, the gladiator school, was less a place of learning, more a holding pen for violence. Stone walls, iron gates, the smell of old wounds. It echoed with curses in 10 languages and prayers to gods forgotten by Rome. Inside, he kept a stable of fighters the way others kept chariots. Each man branded, numbered, trained. Some came from battlefields, captured and sold in chains. Others from courtrooms, condemned to fight instead of hang. A few had even walked in willingly, fugitives, gamblers, men chasing redemption or fame. All bled the same. He knew their records by heart. How many fights? What injuries? Who had snapped someone else? There was Afer, the Gaul, who'd bitten off a rival's ear during drills and wore it on a string like a charm. There was Drusus, a runaway senator's son, caught slumming in the wrong district and sentenced to the arena. And then there was Nico, a boy from Thrace, who hadn't spoken a word since his brother died in the pit. The lanista didn't ask questions. He asked for results. He fed them enough to keep muscle on bone. He kept a healer on site, but only for injuries that paid back. A fighter who limped too long became a sparring dummy for the next match, or worse, hired out as a warm-up corpse for someone else's main event. Disobedience earned punishment. Not lashes that was for amateurs. No, the worst penalty here was silence. No food, no talk, no name on the match list. A man ignored was a man forgotten. In Rome, that was a slower death than any sword. But he also knew when to offer favour. A sip of watered wine, a nod of approval, a coin slipped to a fighter's wife on the outside. These men didn't love him. They respected what he controlled. Freedom, or something that passed for it. A gladiator could earn it, eventually. After enough wins, enough blood. He made sure they saw the dream bright, distant, maybe real. And he made damn sure they knew who owned the path to get there. There was a rhythm to the cruelty. Morning drills began with shouting and ended with bruises. Afternoon sessions traded wooden blades for blunted steel. Evenings were for tending wounds or hiding them. The lanista didn't run the drills himself. That was beneath him now. But he chose who did. Veterans, killers, men who had bled in the arena and lived to grumble about it. They taught the new blood how to fall, how to block, how to scream convincingly without losing focus. They taught the old blood how to stay alive one match longer. The school had fighting styles for everybody. Thracians learned speed and misdirection with curved blades. Myrmilios bulked up for brute force behind a massive shield. Retiari danced with nets and tridents, taunting death like poets with bad timing. The lanista watched it all. He adjusted pairings like a gambler, adjusting dice. If a fighter favoured his left, he was trained to punish with the right. If he feared the helmet's weight, he wore it while eating. He understood something most senators didn't. Gladiators weren't born. They were crafted, bent, shaped, sometimes broken. He rotated sparring partners constantly to prevent attachments. No friends, no loyalties. If they grew too close, they might hesitate to kill, and hesitation made for bad theatre. The sand itself taught as much as the steel did. Fighters learned how to feel its softness, its slope, the way blood soaked into it, sometimes slowly, sometimes fast enough to drown in. Between drills, the lanista quizzed them on their roles. "You are a villain," he told the ones who looked foreign. "Play it well, or they won't cheer when you die." "You are a hero," he told the Romans. "Hold your chin high and bleed with dignity." Every move had a purpose. Every scar, a lesson. Even exhaustion was a tool. Matches didn't happen at full strength. They happened under the sun, after a day of marching, with 10,000 drunk citizens watching. So they trained in pain. They trained in silence. They trained until their dreams were filled with blades. And when they fought for real, they made it beautiful. Because if death couldn't be avoided, at least it could be choreographed. He didn't just run a school. He ran a marketplace. One where men's lives were weighed by applause and priced by body count. The lanista understood that violence was currency. But not just any violence. Good violence. Spectacle. Drama. Stories soaked in sweat and sharpened on steel. And he knew how to sell it. He rented his best fighters to games across the empire. Each transaction greased with bribes and subtle threats. Provincial governors loved a famous name on their amphitheatre posters. The Lion of Latium sold seats. Drusus the Red turned bored crowds into frenzied gamblers. Each match was negotiated like a trade deal. Was it to the death? To first blood? Against beasts? Against 3 men? Every clause affected the purse. The higher the risk, the higher the price. Sometimes the fights were real. Sometimes they were theatre with a fatal understudy. Sometimes they were fixed. He took bets, of course. Not publicly, not foolishly, but always with precision. If a favoured fighter was due to lose, the lanista might accidentally delay his training, sabotage his gear, or pair him against an unexpected opponent. A well-timed defeat could double his earnings and teach his man a lesson in humility. He also hosted private matches, whispers behind closed doors. Rich men liked to stage duels in their gardens. 2 fighters, no crowd, no rules. One leaves, one doesn't. The price for that kind of silence was high, but someone always paid it. And then there were the sponsorships. A newer innovation. Wealthy patrons would sponsor fighters, paying for their gear, feasts, even new tunics, in exchange for being associated with their victories. Like owning a racehorse, but louder. Even death had profit margins. When a fighter died, his body could be sold for dissection, his gear recycled, his story exaggerated and used to promote the next man. The pupil of Cassius the Thunderer. The posters would claim, whether it was true or not, the lanista had long ago stopped seeing his fighters as men. They were assets, commodities. Each step they took on the sand echoed in his account's ledger. He didn't need to fight. He just needed to price the fight correctly. And in Rome, nothing was more lucrative than pain served with pageantry. On paper, he owned them, branded, shackled, fed from his purse. Their contracts were clear. Their freedom was not. But men are not horses. They dream. They remember. They resent. The lanista knew that control was never total, only rented. Like everything else in Rome, he'd seen it crack before. One fighter, Baro, a Numidian with shoulders like temple columns, had won 5 straight bouts. The crowd called him the Black Sunday. They painted his likeness in wine shops. Senators sent wine. Prostitutes wept when he bled. He became more than a slave. He became a legend. And that's when the trouble started. Baro stopped listening, started talking, demanded better food, refused practice matches with rookies, asked for a cut of his winnings. Asked, like a man. The lanista warned him careful. Fame in Rome was flammable, but Baro wouldn't bend. So the lanista had to choose. Beat him publicly and risk mutiny, or sell him quietly and let another fool deal with the fire. He chose neither. He arranged a match against a beast, starved, caged for days, chained to its post. Spectacle guaranteed. Baro won. Barely, but the injuries ended him. Not fast, profitably. Slow, poetic. The crowd cried. The posters doubled in value. The lanista sold Baro's bloodied gear for more than his weight in silver. That was control, but sometimes he still flinched, remembering the moment in the pit when Barrow had locked eyes with him. Not fear, not hatred, just knowing, like he saw through the whole game. The lanista knew others were watching, learning, men who hadn't yet tasted glory but would. And what then? Some gladiators earned the rudis, the wooden sword of freedom after years of loyalty, a rare honor, sometimes genuine, sometimes a tool, a promise dangled just close enough to keep a man obedient, or obedient enough. But even the freed ones never really left. They stayed to train others, became recruiters, or died in the back alleys they once bled for. The public didn't love them, they loved the idea of them. And ideas didn't eat. The lanista understood that. He didn't sell freedom, he sold hope, a far more dangerous currency. And every time he handed a man a wooden sword, he wondered if he was giving away a legend, or making his next enemy. He could stop a riot with a nod. He could fill an amphitheater with a whisper. He had gladiators with more fan mail than senators. And yet when he walked past a temple, matrons clutched their pearls tighter. When he tried to buy land in the city, patrician tongues clicked behind closed doors. The lanista was the paradox Rome preferred not to explain. Needed, but never welcome. Wealthy, but never noble. Respected, but never honored. In fames, the label clung to him like sweat. Same category as actors, undertakers, prostitutes, and pimps. No matter how many champions he trained, how many gold coins clinked in his coffers, he would never be allowed to stand in the Senate, nor dine beside respectable men, unless they wore masks of privacy. Yet behind those same senators' villa walls, he saw everything. He arranged private matches for their sons' birthdays. He brokered fighter rentals for their mistresses' entertainments. He took their gold by day and their dignity by night. The contradictions amused him. They would weep beside him when a crowd favourite fell, then pass legislation capping his fighters' pay. They would toast his success in public baths, then denounce the growing decadence of blood commerce on the Senate floor. He once caught a magistrate's daughter slipping a note to one of his fighters. A poem, folded with perfume. He never returned it. He did, however, triple the man's appearance fee. Reputation was his real currency. The lanista lived and died by it. Too successful, and you became a threat. Too lenient, and you lost control. Too obscure, and no one booked your fighters. He walked the razor's edge every banquet, every back alley deal, every sideways glance. A new law passed that spring, forbidding gladiator schools within the city walls. Moral panic, they called it. Too many young nobles, they whispered, seduced by the arena life. The lanista didn't protest. He simply bought land just outside the city and doubled his advertising. They wanted him gone. Rome wanted blood without the butcher, but he knew better. They'd never kill the games, but something else just might. The sand was shifting, not the arena sand that still drank its fill, but beneath Rome's painted civility, something darker stirred. The lanista heard it first in silences. Empty seats in the slave markets, fewer men volunteering for the ludus. Then came the whispers. A breakout near Capua, a missing training caravan, a merchant whose guards were found bound and bleeding. The wagon emptied of shackles and food. Just bandits, said the magistrates. Just unrest, said the Senate. Just fear, said the streets. But the lanista had been around too long to trust anyone who said just. His informants told a different story. Slaves weren't fleeing. They were gathering, not for escape, but for war. The name floated like smoke across the rooftops. Spartacus, a Thracian, a fighter, one of them. Once trained in a ludus like this one, now gone to the hills with a growing swarm of runaways, deserters, and hungry ghosts. They weren't looting, they were strategizing, outmaneuvering governors, disarming patrols, spreading faster than Rome could admit. And worst of all, he had gladiators with him, trained ones. The lanista paced the courtyard beneath his barracks. He watched his own men spar, eyes narrowed. Who looked too quiet? Who looked too strong? Who had nothing left to lose? He posted guards, doubled night rotations, stopped allowing fighters into town. He claimed it was for discipline. They knew better. He called in favors, senators, clients, friends who owed him coin or blood. No one answered quickly. No one wanted to be seen standing next to a lanista if things turned ugly. Still, the arena games went on. Rome fed its people bread and blood. The shows grew larger, not smaller, as if the Senate could drown out the rising panic with louder applause. But the lanista's eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on the stables, on the kitchens, on the looks traded between fighters who no longer smiled at him, only through him. He could feel it coming. Not a riot, not a scandal, a reckoning. And if Spartacus came for Capua, he knew exactly whose gates would fall first. It didn't start with drums. It started with silence. No morning drills. No clatter of wooden blades. Just wind over sand. And the slow creak of an unbarred gate. The lanista stepped into the yard and saw no one. Not even the guards. For a moment, he thought the place had emptied. Fled. Then he saw the blood. It trailed like spilled ink from the sleeping quarters to the training pit. 2 guards lay crumpled in the straw. One still breathing, barely. The other had no face left to recognize. And across the yard, the main gate gaped open. He moved faster than he had in years, grabbing a sword from the rack unsharpened. Ceremonial. Still better than bare hands. As he neared the pit, he found Nico waiting. The Thracian boy. Silent. Fast. One of his. Nico wasn't alone. 6 others stood beside him. Men who had bowed yesterday, laughed at his jokes last week. Now they looked at him like he was already dead. "You let them go," the lanista said flatly. Nico nodded once. "They were never yours." The words struck harder than a blade. He could hear shouting beyond the wall now. Chaos. Smoke rising in the city. His stable had been emptied from the inside. Not looted. Reclaimed. Spartacus had reached Capua. The revolt wasn't rumor anymore. It was here. It was now. And it had begun with his men. The lanista did the only thing he could. He ran. Through the supply tunnels beneath the ludus. Past old cages. And forgotten chains. He'd built those passages in case a riot ever came, not imagining it would come from the inside. By dusk, the school was burning. Screams rose with the ash. The arena, his empire, lit like a funeral pyre. He didn't look back. He knew which banners flew above the rooftops now. Not Rome's. Not his. Theirs. And somewhere, out in the countryside, a former slave with a sword was marching toward Rome with hundreds at his back, and a trail of broken chains behind him. The lanista survived, but the games, as he had known them, did not. He lived, not gloriously, not famously, just barely. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Rome spun on, pretending it hadn't bled from within, and the lanista, he became something less than a man, more than a ghost. He grew a beard, stopped wearing the crimson tunic, took a new name, in a new town, where the games hadn't reached, a place where the amphitheater was still under construction, where people still believed the arena was glorious. No one recognized him, except once, a merchant boy, passing through, selling wine. He looked twice, blinked, then asked, "Did you once own the Red Gaul? The one who fought blindfolded?" The lanista didn't answer. He just poured the boy a cup, charged him extra. At night he dreamed in sand, not of the battles but the sounds. The roar of a crowd when a man fell just right. The crunch of bone when a mistake met gravity, the hiss of a blade missing its mark and finding something softer. He'd made legends, names that still echoed, scratched on tavern walls, and whispered over dice games. But those men were dead, and the ones who'd risen Spartacus, Nico, the nameless others had burned down the system he helped build. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was the cycle. Rome survived, but his Rome, the one of contracts and blood-slick coin, was buried in that ash. He heard rumors of new schools opening, of a law passed banning private ownership of fighters, of senators debating whether gladiators were too dangerous to train. He chuckled when he read that. They were always dangerous. They always had been. He could have warned them, could have written volumes on what it meant to weaponize desperation and put it on parade. But no one asked. They never did. He sat by a dry well one evening, turning a worn wooden sword in his hands. A rudis never given, only kept. A relic. A lie. He once believed the arena gave men meaning. Now he knew it only gave them stories. And sometimes scars shaped louder legacies than statues. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he listened to the silence. History forgets the hands that tightened the chains. It remembers the ones that broke them. The lanista's name never made it into the marble scrolls, nor the victory arches. No monuments mark where his school once stood. The only trace of him lingers in the stories half-truths shouted in taverns, carved in graffiti behind bathhouse walls. He trained the Red Gaul. He taught Spartacus to grip a sword. He built the games, then vanished. All myths, all possible, all dust. Rome kept the games, for a while, repackaged, renamed, regulated. But the empire never forgot the year the slaves rose, the year the blood ran backward, the year the crowd watched in horror as the fighters left the sand and stormed the seats. And somewhere in that storm, a man survived. Not by sword, not by glory, but by knowing when to disappear. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a victim. He was a craftsman of violence, a builder of myths, a mirror to Rome's hunger. And what he built, in the end, turned on him. But here's the irony. He did what Rome never could. He gave its monsters purpose. He gave its forgotten names. He gave its spectacle teeth. And for all the shame, the sweat, the silence, he gave the world a stage where even the broken could rise once more. So the next time you hear the crowd roar in a film, the next time you see a sand-drenched hero on screen, remember, someone trained him. Someone taught him to fall beautifully. Someone made him bleed in rehearsal. That someone was never the star, just the shadow behind the sword. And sometimes, in the bones of forgotten games, the shadow is all that remains.